Most of you on the survey said that you understood about formative assessment, so we'll go pretty fast through this because it didn't seem to be a big need, except you may learn some things anyway. Warning, tests are coming. I've scattered some little quickie tests throughout this presentation, so you may pay attention. Okay, this is going back to the research. With proper use, formative assessments can result in achievement gains in the range of 15 to 25 percentile points, or 2 to 4 grade equivalents. In other words, classes that are getting good formative assessment are usually ranking 2 to 4 grades above those peers who are not getting that kind of formative assessment. Hattie's research ranks formative assessment as number 3 out of all 196 factors, with an impact factor of 0.90. That's huge. And feedback, Hattie ranks as number 10 with an impact factor of 0.73. Again, think about these together. These make a huge difference in student achievement if you're doing formative assessment to inform both the student and the instruction, and you're giving the student good formative feedback. Okay, what is formative assessment? Data generated to adjust teaching and learning. Now, think about that. Data generated. Formative assessment has to be more than just looking around the room and checking to see if students seem to be following you. Formative assessment is data generated. That means you need to be thoughtful and professional about how you're recording what's happening out there so that you can reflect on it. Okay, here are 5 conditions needed for solid formative assessment. Align targeted content standards. In other words, you've got to be looking for specifically what you thought that you were going to assess. In other words, it's not that they're just doing well. It's not that they're just following you. It's that they're showing mastery of those targeted standards that you identified. All of the items match what has been taught or will be taught. You're not assessing other things. You're assessing the targeted knowledge and skill. Provide specific detail. What and whom. In other words, you're looking at specific objectives and exactly who mastered them at what level. Remember, it's got to be at the level that the standards identified. The results are timely for action to occur, and teachers and students take action based on those. So let's test your knowledge, see if you can come up with the 5 conditions necessary for effective formative assessment. There they are. I hope that you remembered to note those. It's aligned. Everything's been taught. The data that you get is detailed enough that you can make some smart decisions. There's enough time to fix things, and you get busy to fix them. So those are the 5 conditions necessary for effective formative assessment. Okay, from a student's point of view, they want to know, where am I going? What are the objectives? Those have to be very, very clear to students. Where am I now? The level of mastery. And how can I close the gap? How can I get from where I am to where I need to be? Okay, here are some symbols that are strategies to improve learning using formative feedback. See if you can figure out what they are. See if you can figure out what they mean. Okay, you gotta know the target. Provide a clear and understandable target. Good models and poor models. Provide models at different levels of proficiency. What does a target level piece of work look like? What does a poor one look like? What does an exceptional one look like? If they have a model, they're more likely to be able to get where they want to go. This one, offer regular and descriptive, not evaluative, but descriptive feedback. Design lessons focused on objectives. You're specifically teaching what you said you were going to be teaching. Teach students focused revision. Teach them how to fix what's broken and give them opportunity to do that. If they did poorly on a task, show them how to make it better and let them make it better. Teach students to self-assess and set learning goals. Where are you and where do you want to be next? What are you going to work on now? This is very important. Teach self-reflection. Self-reports are number one out of 196 items at 1.44 impact factor. In other words, do you know where you are? Do you know what mastery level you're at? Do you know what your grade would be if you had a summative assessment right now? So see if you can now say what each of these are. Okay, what are some strategies for formative assessment? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you, in your surveys, you almost all indicated that you were pretty proficient in formative assessment. What I think you may not be as proficient about is getting data from those formative assessments. For example, the thumbs up, thumbs down. Are you noting which students put thumbs down to say they don't know what they're doing? If there's any of these that you don't know what are, ask for them. Ask me to explain them. Pop tests. I love pop tests. And the reason is you can ask questions specifically on the learning outcomes. I never take the grades on pop tests, but I look and see which questions did they miss because it's a check for me. I've taught this much information at this point. Who got it? What do I need to go back and reteach? And then make that known to the students as a class. Few of you understood this concept. Let's go over it again. Okay, use instruments to focus on objectives. This is a simple student list, and how could you use something like this? I've noted my objectives across the top there, and as we say have a class discussion, I can just put a check or an X or a question mark as I see the students participate and see where they are. When they're working in groups on a group project, I can have those objectives up at the top and walk around the room and listen or ask questions and just put checks, X's, or question marks for the students as I see what their level of proficiency is. And that will give me opportunity to work with them and with me. For example, I might stop and say, are you sure you know what all the vocabulary words are? You might need to go back and review them because I'm not hearing you use the vocabulary words when you talk to each other. You can give some quick descriptive feedback, but you also have data so that you can reflect on it and make sure that you're using this effectively. If you just walk around, you're probably not looking deeply enough to get good feedback. Okay, this is, instead of a student list, I've got the objectives listed. And then this is when we're, for example, having a class discussion. And I can say, okay, almost all the students were using the vocabulary well. Most of the students were. Or I didn't see the vocabulary coming up the way I wanted it to. The content, the grammar. In other words, whatever your objectives are, you list them. And then if you're doing global as a classroom objective, you focus on which objectives are showing up as mastered and which ones are showing up as partially mastered and which ones need a lot of help. So let's go back and look. This one is student by student, and it's very simple. You can have these, a dozen of them in your desk drawer. And anytime you're doing any quick formative assessment, it just gives you a way to record for deeper reflection, what students are doing. Here is one that is more focused on the objectives, and you're looking at the class as a whole. But what are you trying to figure out, and what kind of data do you need to generate to make that happen? The power of formative assessment is in feedback, and your surveys indicated that most of you were moderately comfortable with feedback, but not all of you, and few of you were totally confident on feedback. Okay, for feedback to be effective, students need to know the goal, where they're supposed to be, where they are, and the way to close. That's the same as in self-assessment and formative assessment. What's the goal, where are they, and what can they do to close the gap? Here's the things John Hattie says in his book. To be effective, feedback needs to be clear, purposeful, meaningful, and compatible with students' prior knowledge and able to provide logical connections. In other words, you need to talk with the student to make sure that they understand the goal, where they are, and what they need to do. I'm not going to read you all of those because you can all read, but you can see that Hattie strongly believes that feedback is essential for that strong learning, and it's a partner that should always be there with formative assessment. There's two types of feedback. There's evaluative feedback and descriptive feedback. Evaluative feedback tells students, it gives students a value judgment. This is good, this is poor, you're all right here, but not so, you still have a way to go. That's evaluative. Descriptive tells them exactly what's missing and what they need to do to make it better. Okay, evaluative feedback evaluative feedback may take the form of approval. That's a good essay. You've done well. Good work. Disapproval. That's not good enough. Ouch. You're not there yet. You might give good stars. You might write it out again. Stay in and do it over. There's all kinds of things that go I'm not going to accept that. So evaluative feedback does give the students, they know they're not on target, but it doesn't give them the steps they need to get there. So descriptive feedback is much better. It focuses on identified learning outcomes, makes a specific reference to the student's achievement, and gives them a way to make that improvement. There's an example. That's a good introduction because you have covered the main points we discussed at the beginning. Now, which points do you think you should expand on? I know exactly what I did well, and I know exactly what I need to do to be better. Okay, so let's have a little test. You can do better. Evaluative. Good job. Evaluative. Check the meaning of this word. Descriptive. Can you make this paragraph clearer? Descriptive. So practice your own feedback. I'm still working on that because I'm still tempted to say, well done, good. That's not enough. Let's be specific. Okay, evaluative feedback has several bad results. It can make the good students feel complacent. In other words, nah, I'm good. I can do good stuff. No problem. And they don't work as hard. And then less able students feel like, I'm a poor student. I don't need to get better. And remember that self-evaluation is terribly, terribly important. Students pretty much do what they think they're going to do. So we need to make sure that we help them grow in understanding their mastery levels. Okay, sometimes it's very helpful to ask the student if you've given enough feedback. Do you know what to do next? Is that enough help? Do you understand now? What do you do if you get stuck again? The students are pretty good to tell you whether they've got it or not. Okay, if you're giving written feedback, um, make sure they can read your writing, that they understand the feedback, and so written feedback, you need to look to make sure you're being very clear. Now, this is something that's interesting from research. If students are given a grade and then asked to do it again, they don't make much progress. They usually make about the same grade at the second time. If students are given comments and then asked to do it again, they usually do much, much better. If students are given comments and grades, they don't do much better. So they focus on the grades and don't pay attention to the comments. So comments alone are going to be your strongest form of formative feedback. Giving grades as formative feedback tends not to be as effective. Okay, also, don't give don't correct everything at once. This is particularly important when students are writing, doing essays, doing reports. You could correct 1,000 things and overwhelm the students. To pick out 2, maybe 3 things that are important and correct those. For example, the verb use, if that's what you're working on. Capitalization and periods. Just pick out 2 or 3 things and help them work on those, and don't overwhelm them in what they have to do. They don't have to be perfect all at once. So here's a summary on the feedback. It's best initiated by the learner. When you teach them to ask for feedback, that's wonderful. Focus very clearly on the learning outcomes you're trying to get. Occurs as the students are doing the learning, provides information on how and why the student understands and misunderstands, and provides strategies to help the student improve, assist the student to understand the goals. Again, where am I? What's the goal? Where am I? What do I have to do to get better?